Hey everybody, my name is Calvin Garcia. I will be presenting today about clear-cut forestry. So let's get to it. Clear cutting refers to the complete or nearly complete removal of trees from an area or land. Now the size really matters. It can go from 5 acres to 100 acres, of course. Now when it is done actually properly, the people make sure to evacuate the land, make sure everything's good, animal or any animals or for any type of natural thing out there is moved out of the way. And then they go ahead and clear the area, which means removing the wood. The practice of clear cutting began in 1800s. It was very largely driven by economic concerns. Um, a more common method of selective timber harvesting actually began in the early 1900s. This type of harvest removed only the most commercially valued trees in the forest, which means only all the trees that looked really good or looked like they could actually be made into something. But this was a problem because they did not take the trees, or they did not harvest a tree that were like forked, crooked, diseased, or genetically inferior than the other ones. So this poorly thought out practice of harvesting uh, the best trees and leaving the low quality trees was actually considered high grading. But then, in the 1950s, 1960s, professional foresters recognized the degrading of forests that had begun from high grading and began to recommend clear cutting to address forest health concerns. Clear cutting also followed the replantation of natural regeneration, which actually became a little more common practice nowadays. Now, there are some issues with clear cutting, of course. The first one is that clear cutting is not a universally accepted practice. Opponents of the practice of cutting every tree within a specific area contend it degrades the environment, but forestry and professional resource managers argue that the practice is actually sound if used properly. The second item is clear cutting inhibits the sustainability of healthy, holistic forest ecosystems. So it does mess with the ecosystem of the forest and what it has built already. Deforestation, uh, that is the resulting removal of trees from clear cutting, which lead into a plantation forestry and eventually evolves into an environmental degradation, which means it's just dead and it's a dead plain where trees used to grow but no longer do. Now, the fourth one is old forest, basically. This has systematically clear cut where healthy ecosystems that have evolved over centuries to be more resistant to insect and disease are cut down. This is a big negative, but it has been done. Now, the fifth reason is the aesthetics and quality forest views are compromised by clear cutting. The view is no longer there. It is just a bunch of stumps in a plain big area. Now, there are alternatives to clear cutting. First would be clear cut. This one I really don't suggest because it is almost every previous form of clear cutting that we reviewed in the history slide. Now, there is a patch cut. This is where small cut blocks were designed with alternating leaf strips so that regeneration is within 2 tree lengths of an edge. This will be providing the cutover areas with seed fall, and it protects regeneration against snow, wind, and temperature extremes. Another one is green tree retention, also known as the clear cutting with reserves. The objective is to leave 25 trees in a small clear cut to enhance structural diversity of future stands for wildlife and aesthetics. One of the other alternatives, which is actually highly recommended, is thinning. Now, as you can see in the before thinning, there's a lot more trees, of course, and then after thinning, there's less trees, but there's still quite a few compared to the plane of stumps that is on the last picture. Now, thinning is when they remove just a few trees and they leave a certain amount still. This actually gives the trees more sunlight and more nutrients for them to survive. But when it comes to harvesting mature trees for timber, for example, in the West Cascades, clear cutting is more common than thinning. That's because the predominant tree species in Western Oregon forest is Douglas fir, and its seedless needs full sun to thrive. They will not grow well in the understory unless the overstory trees are very widely spaced. By creating a clearing with lots of sun exposure, clear cutting provides more ideal growing conditions for Douglas fir seedless planted after the timber is harvested. Another disadvantage of using thinning, though, is that the timber in Western Oregon is if you create too much space between the taller trees that grew up in a dense west side forest, it increases wind exposure and the chances that they will be blown away is greater. So, with this method, of course, it all depends on the location and the place you are in, and especially the season. Now, we'll be getting into the pros. So, the first one is the regenerating tree species that need full sunlight to stimulate seed sprouting and seedling growth. So, like we mentioned before, some trees cannot handle the wind because they're not deep rooted. So, when it comes to clear cutting, there's enough space, there's enough things for these tree trunks to actually get seeds from air, from the winds that this massive emptiness is creating, and enough sunlight in order to sprout again. Another positive is that clear cutting maximizes the amount of revenue from a harvest operation by utilizing all the materials from the site. Modern clear cuts actually remove a higher percentage of merchantable wood, which means they don't leave anything behind and they use everything that they can until the stump is actually free in order for them to grow. Now, clear cutting also is able to provide farmland to third world countries who actually need the farmland. So, this in a way helps society as a whole wherever they do clear cutting. Now, clear cutting does have some environmental effects, so we're going to start with the bad ones. The most notable effect is the destruction of plant life and animal habitat. Since clear cutting affects an entire area without discrimination, plant loss and the destruction of animal habitat is an unavoidable byproduct of clear cutting. The other bad thing is that the habitat or the forest loses its appeal. Now we're going to be getting into the good environmental effects. First one is they create wide open spaces with lots of sun exposure. Clear cutting also creates forest clearings that are habitat for some species of songbirds, deer, or elk. Economically, clear cutting is the most efficient and economical method of harvesting a large group of trees. Third reason would be the fewer disturbances to the forest floor because they'll be focusing on one certain area and not the whole forest. As well as supporters of the clear cutting contend that the practice results in increased soil water and extreme flow since when trees are removed from an area, the amount of water in that area increases. This is actually very desirable because this provides water to the populations of plants, animals, and even humans while also improving soil quality and encouraging tree growth. Now, after the presentation, if you did feel strongly about clear cutting and the negative effects it has to our environment, you can donate to the nonprofit StopClearCuttingCalifornia.org, or if you want to do something for the environment today, you can actually donate to One Tree Planted. For $1, they'll plant a tree, which is amazing. Thank you to everyone that finished the presentation. If you had any questions or would like to read any of the articles that I read in order to get this information, they will be posted down below. Please feel reach out, leave a comment, and thank you, and shout out to my professor at Dianza.